Your learners will forget half of what you tell them by the end of the week, but they will remember a story you told them months ago. And here's why. When you hear information, only the language part of your brain activates. When you hear a story, your entire brain lights up. That's neuroscience. That's why stories stick. So today, I want to show you how to identify when a story will work, the two types of stories that will cover almost every moment in your training, and how to structure one that actually lands. My name's Jordon Taylor with the Corporate Training Companion. Let's jump in. Starting with how to identify when a story will resonate with your group and enhance retention of key concepts versus just eating up time. Stories resonate best when you're illustrating concepts like frameworks, a process, or a general approach. The key determining factor is that a complex idea with multiple factors or steps come together versus a single point or a single step in a broader process. If it's a single point, you probably want an analogy. And if you want a deeper dive in building analogies, I have a full video on that, linked in the description, and a YouTube card will pop up right about here. You can open that in another tab. If it's multiple connected concepts, like a framework, a process, or a general approach, you want a story. If there's time, because when it comes to stories and training, timing is incredibly important. A good story lives in that 2 to 4 minute window. 5 minutes really starts to push it. And anything longer, and you're eating into content time. Anything shorter, and you're probably better off going with a quick analogy or two. Once you've identified that you have a concept that would be best illustrated by a story, and you have the time to do it, consider the type of story that you want to tell. To simplify things, I like to bucket these into 1, stories that show how multiple concepts work together, and 2, stories that show the consequence of getting something either right or wrong. Let's explore story type 1 a little bit further, the framework or process story type. This type of story illustrates how a framework or a process works, but in a less foreign and more relatable way, making the concept more memorable and thus more implementable post-training. For example, I was recently delivering a course for leaders on measuring success and driving results. There were 3 principles that we wanted participants to walk away knowing. Those 3 principles were results, success, and impact. Okay, so I could say the results are your metrics, the success is whether you achieved your goals or not, and the impact is how it affected others. Or I could do what I did, and I tell the story about how I baked my first fondant cake for a friend. I researched and poured through YouTube videos, and I found the perfect recipe. I followed it to a T. I measured the exact amount of flour. I baked it at the exact temperature for the exact amount of time. And I measured when the cake rose perfectly, exactly 3 inches. I was super excited. Then I followed all the instructions on using fondant, and the cake came out perfectly. Everyone at the party knew I was in charge of the cake, so I got there a little bit early, and my friend was so pleased that I delivered it on time and it looked so beautiful. She wanted it on the table where all of the people were putting gifts as sort of a centerpiece. It was already a huge success. Everyone that came to the party thought it was amazing. When it came time to cut into it, it was delicious. Multiple friends since have asked me to bake cakes for their parties and their kids' parties, and to this day, because of that cake, I am known in my circle of friends as the baker. So that's the story. And then I asked my class, what were the results in this story? And then they would go through them, the precision with which I baked the cake at the exact temperature with the exact amount of flour, all of those key metrics. What was the success? Well, the goal was to have a cake at the party on time that was delicious and looked beautiful, and all of those things happened, so the goal was met. But what was the impact? Well, now I'm the baker in my circle of friends. All of my friends come to me with all of their baking questions, with all of their baking requests. I am seen as the baking Sherpa. That was the impact. And so now you see the difference between telling the story versus just talking about results, success, and impact. On to story type 2, the cautionary tale or success story, however you want to look at it. This story shows the consequence of getting it right or wrong, depending on how you deliver it. Take this story, for example. I delivered call center sales training for many, many years. And if you're at all familiar with sales training, there will always be a closing or offering sales module as part of that training. Now, part of that general approach of closing the sale is to not talk your customer out of the sale, as in they may do that themselves, but you shouldn't do it for them. So I was working side by side with a rep named Tommy, and he had been through the training, but he was still struggling with closing deals, and he asked me to listen to a few of his calls. And so I did, and after sitting with him for about an hour, I noticed a pattern. He would ask for the sale, and then he would continue to talk about the product. So he would say something like, "Did you want me to get that rung out for you?" And then instead of letting the customer actually respond with a yes or no, he would just continue talking about the features of the product that he had just asked the customer to buy. What he didn't know is that while I was sitting next to him listening to his calls, I had the ability to mute his microphone. So on the next call, he did the same thing. But this time, after he asked for the sale, I muted his mic. He had no idea, so he kept yammering on about the product, and after about 7 seconds or so, the customer said, "Yeah, let's do that." I then unmuted the mic, and Tommy ultimately got the sale. Afterwards, we revisited the closing framework, and he did much better from then on. As you can see, this can be spun as either a cautionary tale of not following the framework or a success story of what happens when it's followed, which is why I bucket these two together. So that's how to identify when a story would be a good fit and 2 primary story types for corporate training. Now for a few more tips on how to structure a story that actually lands. First and foremost, steal stories. You are exposed to stories all of the time from other trainers and leaders in your company about what has worked and what hasn't. You're also exposed to stories from the media. You consume reels, podcasts, TV shows, etc., etc., etc. Find inspiration everywhere, because if a story has resonated with you, it's likely it will resonate in your classroom as well. Second, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. My grandfather used to always say this. He was an educator. I find it doubly true in corporate training. And we all know for a fact that George Washington never actually said, "I cannot tell a lie about cutting down that cherry tree." It's a made-up story to drive a valuable point home. So don't be afraid to change some of the details of what actually happened to suit your purposes. For example, the cake story. I personalized it because it's easier and more relatable to tell a story about me instead of a friend of a friend of a friend that it actually happened to. And me being or not being a good baker is not the point. The mute button story. Tommy wasn't his real name. Truth is, I don't remember who it was. But making it about somebody makes the story more relatable. Lastly, practice your story out loud before you do it in front of a class. It's not a one-sentence analogy. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they need to be articulated or everything falls apart. So don't wing it. Now here's my challenge to you. Identify one framework or process that you teach regularly. Find or build a 2 to 4 minute story that brings it to life. Practice it out loud until it's smooth, and then tell it in your next session. And notice what happens to retention. Drop a comment and let me know which type of story you built. And if you're looking for a job as a corporate trainer, I have a free corporate trainer interview crash course. It's a blueprint that covers org structures, different training roles, how corporate training actually works, and how to interview well for a position in this field. Link is in the description. My name is Jordon Taylor with the Corporate Training Companion. Until next time.